We want to welcome Rosemary Low back today. Thank you so much for being here. I just confirmed with her a little while ago. She was a founding member of the World Parrot Trust. She used to be a curator at Laura Parque. She's been all over the world, researching, studying, and most importantly, writing about all the things she's learned and seen in her time with birds in the wild, which is, the way birds do have such a better life in the wild than we usually can give them in captivity. But more importantly, for the birds we do love in captivity, she helps us understand their wild nature so we can bring a little bit of that into our homes. So thank you again for being here today, Rosemary. I feel like it's such an honor that you've agreed to be with us. You're just like the most famous parrot person in the world, as far as I'm concerned. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to you and go off video, and we'll reconvene together later. Thanks again.
Well, thank you so much, Anne, for inviting me again. It's a great pleasure because I know you have some wonderful people in your organisation. So, yeah, I'm very fond of photographing parrots, so you will see that nearly all the photographs are mine. And just a little reminder that Phoenix Landing has marvelously reprinted this book, Understanding Parrots, which is now available. So let's start with the basics. Just to remind you that most of our parrots are only 1 or 2 generations away from wild caught birds. They should not be treated like domesticated species. There are very few domesticated species of parrots: cacariques, budgerigars, cockatiels, some lovebirds. And in recent years, the green-cheeked conure and some of the popular mutations, such as the pineapple. I have to say about these wonderful little conures, they might be small, but that doesn't mean that they need small accommodation. They're some of the most skillful flyers in the whole of the parrot kingdom. They do need to fly, not to be kept in small cages. So every parrot is perfect in its natural habitat. We have to we must be sympathetic and understand their needs, which often include perching in quite unexpected places. Something else that we need to be very aware of, that our parrots are extremely sensitive to noise, and there are a lot of things going on in our homes that are probably quite stressful in that respect that we often don't realise, especially when the television is on loudly. The sensitivity of parrots to sound starts when they're in the nests, when they can distinguish the calls of their parents from others of the same species. So that is not just a wild guess. It has been proved by the Hyacinth Macaw project working in the Pantanal, and also with researchers of other species such as the little parrotlets. So just remember, turn down the volume and preferably don't keep your parrot in the same room as the television. We have to understand that parrots have a great need to gnaw. A wonderful quote from John Sparks and Tony Soper in their book. This habit is not always understood by the owners, who accuse them of vandalism when they rip into aviaries or household furniture. In fact, it is perfectly respectable parrot behaviour. So parrots need to look after their beaks, and they spend a lot of time honing them to keep them clean and sharp. And this helps to keep the continuously growing horny sheath worn down, and it helps to exercise their powerful jaw muscles. One thing that many people underestimate when they have a number of parrots is how many fresh branches from trees they will need so that they can provide constant occupation for the beak. And we must allow them to be destructive. It's important behaviour. And don't forget, they chew everything they can reach. So don't tell them off if they get hold of your favourite magazines. That's your fault, not theirs. Stripping bark also has some important functions. Willow is a absolutely marvellous tree to give to them. Here you can see one of my Stella's lorikeets actually stripping it, stripping pieces off, not just gnawing it, stripping off pieces of willow. And it's beneficial from a health point of view as well, because it contains salicin, which is a chemical similar to aspirin, and it's thought to be responsible for pain relieving and anti-inflammatory effects. So it's quite possible that if you've got an older bird that's got arthritis, providing it with fresh cut branches of willow, and I do mean fresh cut, could be very beneficial for it. In the wild, lots of parrots feed on bark, such as these blue and yellow macaws that I observed in the Pantanal. And bark contains valuable minerals, including calcium, which is one of the minerals that is most important for our birds. So we've got to get a constant supply for our parrots, especially the most destructive species, such as cockatoos and macaws. And for birds in aviaries, that's very important. So often you see perches that have been there so long, they are shiny. And this is really a great shame. The birds need better treatment than that. In fact, they need, if you haven't got many birds, but you've got plenty of trees, you can give them twigs every day. Otherwise, once a week is marvellous. And of course, you can make your own toys, which is very easy to do from a few very simple components. But just make sure that any stainless steel components are stainless and not some cheap metal that could be harmful. Why are parrots so destructive? Well, they need strong beaks to excavate or enlarge nest sites. And in the case of hyacinth macaws, of course, strong beaks are absolutely essential to open the akuri nuts that is such a large and important part of their diet. So you can see on the right, this was a breeding pair of hyacinth macaws at Parmitos Park, and they made a wonderful job of destroying the part of the feeding hatch of their aviary. So remember, it's essential behaviour, not bad behaviour. Again, we have to think about parrots as being so different from other companion animals because there are 400 species with widely differing behaviours. Also, they're highly individual too, and just like humans, they have very distinct personalities. You can see this yellow-naped Amazon is one that has a very strong personality. There'll be different types of behavior in various parrot species. There are a few species that are naturally aggressive, such as the wonderful hawk-headed parrot, and for that reason, I wouldn't really recommend it as a companion. And some cockatoos as well. But when I hand-reared a young hawk-headed parrot in my home, it was at the weaning stage, and I was wearing this T-shirt with this wonderful design of these Amazons. But you can see the lower bird has a very aggressive pose. And even at 10 weeks old, this young hawkhead recognized that aggressive pose and it attacked my T-shirts. So be careful what you wear. And cockatoos also have a natural aggression. Even in the wild, like Mark Bouzaquet, who was some years ago studying the red-vented or Philippine cockatoo, he observed how there's a natural individual distance in pairs in the field, even, bonded pairs. So you can imagine why we have so many problems in breeding pairs of cockatoos, and especially red-vented cockatoos in aviaries, because we simply can't give them sufficient distance from each other. Now, we have to learn to read parrot behavior, of course, and also know why parrots are aggressive. A very common problem with companion birds is that the cage is too small. It's so important. I cannot overemphasize it, because a lot of parrots are so possessive of their cages and they hate the cage to be touched. So in a small cage, this does create never-ending problems. And our companion birds are also aggressive if they are in breeding condition, because they're defending their territory or their mate. Or they can be aggressive because the behavior of the carer is inconsistent, or the carer just is not sentient enough regarding the needs of parrots and how sentient parrots are. I think in rare cases as well, excuse me, you get the rare individual parrot that is naturally aggressive. And we have to accept that this bird is never going to make a companion, and that it's just better off in an aviary with another bird of its own species. And the behavior of the different species can be observed in the wild. Ian Rowley in Australia spent most of his life studying the galah, and he said that they give the impression of enjoying their lives to a much greater extent than most other animals. Therefore, for them to be confined to a small space, which will happen if they're companion birds, is very frustrating for them. And I really wouldn't recommend this species as a companion. For one thing, they're extremely prone to obesity. incorrect diet. If you give them sunflower seed, then they are definitely going to put on weight. They need a lot of small seeds and sprouted foods and growing green items. Unfortunately, quite often you see galahs with fatty lipomas that are very difficult to treat, and that is the result of incorrect diet. Also, lack of flight exercise. So I don't recommend this species for companion. Beautiful birds in the wild, but not closely confined. Also, cockatoos are among the most playful of birds. They must be kept busy or they're going to destroy everything in sight. This is natural behavior. But when you see them in the wild, they are just so playful, such as these bare-eyed cockatoos rolling about on the ground, playing together. So if they are in captivity, they need so much to stimulate them, items to destroy and companions to play with. They're highly intelligent birds, and if they're not constantly stimulated, their time in captivity really is a sort of hell, especially in a small cage. In the wild, you quite often see birds play fighting, such as these blue-fronted Amazons in the Pantanal. And captive parrots will also play fight, provided they've got enough space. These two, you can tell they're just playing, they're holding each other's feet. Other very playful birds are lorikeets. They will play on a flat surface or in an aviary for hours on end, but they do need a lot of space. And it's just so amusing to see them enjoying themselves so much. Parrots, of course, also love to swing, and we can easily provide items that gives them that form of enjoyment. But do be careful with rope swings, because if rope unravels or if they bite it and ingest the fibers, it can be fatal. So always cut off the loose ends and observe very closely that they're not swallowing any little pieces of the fabric. Our aviary birds, we can give them branches, thin branches, so that they can play and swing on the ends of them. And young parrots especially will really enjoy that. A very important factor to consider for birds that are kept alone is that they don't have a mate to indulge in mutual preening. I mean, when you watch parrots in the wild, you see this so much. It's a method of bonding, but also, of course, it's important because they can't preen their own head feathers. So they would have a head full of pin feathers if they're kept on their own. And unfortunately, you do quite often see that. These were two of my rose-headed conures, which I'd had to separate for a while. And the minute I put them back together, they started to preen each other's head feathers and remove those old feather sheaths. thus establishing their pair bond. South American parrots especially spend a lot of time in mutual preening. But this behaviour does vary according to the species. For example, eclectus parrots, you almost never see them preening each other, or it's very rare. And this is because their breeding biology is quite different in that they don't establish a pair bond, because in the wild, the female establishes a nest site, and the males will come and feed her at the nest site and feed her when she's got chicks. So one female can be fed and served by 3 or 4 males. So there's not that strong pair bond. And then eventually the female will lose her nest site to another female, but the males will continue to feed the females in that nest. So if you've got a companion eclectus parrot, you'll probably find that it's not very keen on having its head feathers rubbed. The eclectus is a female dominant species. And this also applies to ringneck parakeets and the small African parrots, such as Senegals. And generally speaking, they are not as affectionate as South American parrots. They don't have that strong pair bond. If you're breeding ringnecks, for example, you can put the males and females together 2 or 3 months before, because the male will be quite frightened of the female, so he needs time to build up his confidence before he mates with her, which is not something you see in the neotropical parrots. So if you're going to choose one of the small Phococephalus parrots, I would recommend a male, not a female, as they're usually, but not always, more affectionate pets. So what else do you take into consideration when you're choosing the species? Of course, it's very important, the size of your house, and that you can have a cage that really is adequate, even though that parrot is let out once or more a day to fly around. Age is very important. You have to learn how to distinguish a young bird. Unfortunately, not all sellers are honest about the ages of the birds they are selling. So go to a breeder and, if possible, see the young birds either with their parents or when they're being hand reared. Longevity, it's something that is so important. Of course, most people who buy a macaw, for example, don't do so when they're 20 years old because they can't afford it or they don't have the right circumstances then. So this also applies to Amazons, which are also very long-lived, say 50 years, for example, and even cockatiels and parakeets can live up to 30 years. So unfortunately, it means that most parrots will have several homes in their lifetimes. If you are rescuing parrots that have had a previous home or in a rescue centre, I would suggest that you have had experience with other parrots before you do this. To me, talking ability is something which is absolutely not important. In fact, the less like a human being the parrot is, the better. Recognizing eye color, it's not always easy, but in grey parrots, it's extremely easy because they don't achieve that adult yellow eye color until they're about a year old. And even at 6 months, the eye is starting to turn lighter. So eye colour is a good guide in greys, but unfortunately not in so many other species. This is the pale eye of an adult, but grey parrots are one of the most sensitive species. Unfortunately, because of their ability to mimic, they are chosen by people who really don't have the sensitivity or the experience to look after them. They're not an easy species. They're very prone to feather plucking and also to calcium deficiency, which means that many greys die before the age of 20 or 30 even, because their owners don't realize that they must be supplemented with calcium and, if possible, exposed to sunlight so that they can absorb that vitamin D3, because without it, many grey parrots die young from seizures. So what would I recommend? Well, I think the small conures of the genus Pyrhura are just perfect little birds. They're small size, they're not noisy like the bigger, mainly green conures. They're very inquisitive, and they're great fun. They can become such loving, gentle companions. But as I mentioned earlier, they are extremely agile in flight. They need to be let out to fly, preferably at least a couple of times a day. And they need a large cage because they must have activity within the cage as well. This is my companion crimson-bellied conure when she was an innocent little baby. Sometimes people see a wonderful tame parrot and they think, oh, I want one like that. But unfortunately, not all parrots are like that, and most of them never will be, especially if they're not acquired when they're young. And sadly, today we have to remember that there are still smuggled wild caught birds about, and they will never tame down or settle down in captivity. It's such a tragedy that these highly sentient birds are still being illegally taken from the wild. There are still a lot of Moluccan cockatoos and umbrella cockatoos that were taken from the wild. You can see one here. I have a friend who has a cockatoo rescue who understands cockatoos so well, and how the males especially, can suddenly fly into a rage, and they can be extremely dangerous. Here you can see that despite her deep understanding of the behavior of these birds, she has on one occasion suffered a really bad bite, because their behavior of these wild-caught males is so unpredictable. The white cockatoos are also extremely clever birds. There's been a lot that I'm sure you've all read about. Goffin's cockatoos, who are so clever, this one in captivity, of course, that they can make tools to retrieve objects. They can undo padlocks, and they can escape from cages. Years ago, I didn't have any escape, but in the aviary I had for my breeding pair, they learned to undo the C-clips that were holding the wire mesh to the wooden base of the aviary. And I really wouldn't recommend wooden aviaries for these birds. They need everything metal. Something else we have to consider is, oh, I don't know if I can get rid of that. The conures of the aratingas and some other species, such as Patagonians, are highly sociable birds. Patagonians, for example, found in very large flocks in the wild. Unfortunately, many of these birds were captured as wild-caught adults and sold, imported into Europe and the USA, and sold as companions as single birds. They never settle if they are alone. They will call incessantly, and their voices are extremely loud. And the only solution for such birds is to acquire a mate and keep them in an aviary and give them the opportunity to socialize with their own species. So we consider screaming to be an undesirable behavior, but it's a normal behavior that is undesirable because the bird is in undesirable circumstances. So we have to be prepared for that. I mean, the mealy Amazon, for example, is one of the loudest of the parrots. It has a lovely temperament. They're wonderful birds to keep, but it can be difficult to tolerate their voices, and people must be aware of that before they acquire them. Cakes are very popular, but they have quite harsh voices, and they can be extremely noisy at times. Just to mention that this is a young white-bellied cake, and it's normal for young of this species to have black feathers on the head, and some people think that they must be hybrids, but that is not the case. What stimulates parrots to scream? Loud sounds, of course, radio, television, vacuum cleaners, or if they're attention seeking, don't let your bird feel neglected. Talk to it or rub its head every time you pass the cage. Social animals like parrots are used to many interactions every day. It's a myth that if you do not reinforce an undesirable behavior, it will subside. This is not true when it comes to loud vocalizations, unfortunately. What else makes parrots noisy? If they hear alarm calls of other birds, if a cat is about, for example, or if you leave the room and they can hear you nearby, because they call them because it's like keeping in contact with the flock. You are their flock. Or they scream when you're speaking to someone else and they want your attention. Of course, they also are noisy when they're bored. So it's up to you to find ways of keeping them occupied. And you can anticipate when screaming is going to occur and offer fresh cut twigs with bark on, push rolled up cardboard through the bars, offer a nut that is hard to crack, give them a millet spray or a branch with young leaves, blossoms or berries, or favourite wild foods such as dock, as you can see here in the green stage. They love it. Fresh cut branches such as these of willow are so important. I can never overemphasize that. And you can grow foods in your own garden, or even if you've just got a patio, such as red currants and raspberries, that are so healthy and provide such good environmental enrichment when you can offer them fresh. That's especially the case with raspberries. I find that they don't like shop-bought raspberries because they're too ripe for their taste. They like raspberries just before they're ripe. Of course, hand-reared parrots expect a very high level of human attention. After all, you are the substitute mate. So calling out to you is normal, but excessive screaming is not. So don't reinforce this behavior by yelling, "Stop that." A loud and excited response is reinforcing the screaming habit. It's a reward, so please don't do it. Young hand-reared parrots could be noisy because they're hungry. Unfortunately, many breeders sell hand-reared young too early before they're fully weaned. The extreme example, of course, is the hyacinth macaw, because they stay with their parents for up to 18 months old in the wild, and this has been proved by the Aurora Azul project, who identifies chicks in the nest with rings and microchips and so on. So even if a breeder tells you that a young parrot is weaned, continue to hand rear it for as long as it wants to take food from you. Because if it's hungry, it loses confidence in you, it's extremely unhappy and stressed and loses weight, and it will never get over this early trauma of being hungry. So you can't, if a young parrot no longer wants to be hand-fed, it won't take it. You can't overfeed them. Here's a pair in the Pantanal of hyacinths with a young one. And it's so important, whether parrots are in an aviary or in the wild, that they stay with their parents for a long time to learn the behavior of their own species. That is why parent-reared young parrots can make excellent pets, because they have learned so much from their parents. And if you acquire them when they are young, they're less likely to have problem behaviors than those hand-reared from an early age and never socialized with their own species. I mean, I've found that with my crimson-bellied conures. I hand-reared 2 on one occasion, and they were little bullies nipping me, and their behavior was not good because they'd never had any parents to teach them the correct behavior. Whereas in contrast, in an aviary, the pair with their young that stayed with them for months were marvelously well behaved. They took notice of what the parents told them. For example, if a blackbird was making an alarm call in the vicinity, when I opened the hatch in the morning to let them out, the parents would tell the young ones not to come out, and they wouldn't come out until the parents gave them the all clear. So these young birds learn so much from their parents that gives them a better start in life. Young parrots also need soft foods and not weaned onto hard foods too early. I hate to see young hand-reared parrots with a lot of pellets or seed in front of them. They need soft foods, and they need that for a long time, for months. And so often they're weaned onto hard foods too early. Some of the foods that parrots eat in the wild. Here there's an Australian king parrot eating green figs, and figs are an important food of so many parrots in the wild. And you can get from your health food store dried figs, soak them until they're soft, it could be a few hours, and place them on a hanger. And this is a marvelous food for many parrots, also with a high calcium content. And also providing environmental enrichment. This is perhaps an extreme example of environmental enrichment, but for a Moluccan cockatoo, you really can't go too far. They need to destroy items like bark-covered branches and leather, which are not harmful, but will keep them busy for hours on end. This is the worst example. A pair of parrots in an aluminium cage with nothing, absolutely nothing, to keep them occupied. To me, that is cruelty. A friend of mine has beautiful murals painted on his walls. He just has 2 cages for his birds, so they're also looking out on soft, pastel, pleasing colours. And that's important too, because loud, harsh colours, such as red, are really not good for them. This is a friend of mine in the Netherlands. She used to have a living room. Now she has a parrot gym, and her birds are very lucky. They are never bored. If you've got the space, build an outside flight for your parrot. And if you're extremely lucky, you might be able to build this onto a window, even with a little wire mesh tunnel from the window to the aviary, so that your birds can have some time outside, and they will enjoy that so much, especially the rain and the sun on their plumage, which they can't get if they are permanently enclosed inside. And rain on the plumage is such a wonderful thing for parrots. A friend of mine has 2 hyacinth macaws. In fact, the one on the right was the first hyacinth macaw ever bred in the UK and one of the first to be bred in Europe. And it was reared by the parents, but then at the end it had to be hand reared because it suffered a health problem. So it remained a very tame bird all his life. And as you can see, my friends would open the window and he would come inside and have breakfast with them. A truly wonderful bird and wonderful people looking after him. They knew what he needed. The question is often asked, why does my parrot nip me when he's on my shoulder? The answer should be obvious. You're not giving him your full attention. You're talking to someone else or doing something else. So don't have him on your shoulder. Preferably not any time, but especially not when you can't give him a lot of focused attention. Just a little bit about parrot vision. They have UV vision, so they can detect the degree of ripeness of fruits in the dim light of the forest. Or those kept indoors will benefit from UV lamps that are made for birds, and it also assists in the manufacture of vitamin D, therefore calcium absorption. Vision, some of the mutations that are bred these days have red eyes, such as Lutino cockatiels, and that's probably means that they have quite poor eyesight, and it might be a reason why some of them have night frights. Now, the eyes are very important for reading behaviour. You can see the bird on the right. If you put your hand near it, it's going to get you. This one is not quite ready to bite, but it's very watchful. This one is definitely ready to attack. Look at the flared tail feathers and the iris of the eye, the raised head feathers. Amazon behaviour is very easy to read, but it's not necessarily the case with greys, and you need to watch their eyes. If they're very slightly narrowed, it could mean they're about to attack you. Amazon parrots, some species are extremely excitable and easily stimulated to overload behaviour. Signs are dilating the pupil, raising the nape feathers, as in this double yellow head, and lowering the head and body. In the wild, you can see these orange-winged Amazons are probably threatening another orange wing that has come too close to them. Even the small conures like the green sheet and the crimson-bellied can be very excitable. You have to watch for dilating the pupils, raising the nape feathers, as in the one on the right, and fanning the tail. And with head and body lowered, you know that this bird is getting ready to nip you if you give it the chance. Cockatoos, when the crest is erected slowly, the cockatoo is wary or nervous. They're frequently misunderstood. These visitors in a zoo saw the stereotypic behavior of this wild-caught umbrella cockatoo, and one of them said, "It's dancing." No, it's not. It's just, oh, sorry, Malaccan cockatoo. It's just a very stressed bird. Parrots must fly. Well, we know that, but unfortunately, there are still a lot of people who think that there's nothing wrong in wing clipping. And it was such a common practice decades ago, and it just took too long for this practice to die. A young parrot will not develop physically properly if it's wing clipped. It's also very susceptible to injuries from falling. And if it does escape, wing clipping is not going to save it. It's more likely that it will be caught by a dog or killed by a car. Unfortunately, often wing clipping is carried out so that a person can control a parrot. That's what I call psychological abuse. And this results in phobic behavior. You can see the stress this poor bird was in. This was just after it had its wings clipped. One owner of a 2-year-old Quaker said that the bird was afraid to fly, and it was also afraid of its owner when let out of the cage. It would fall in the cage and damage a blood feather. It refused to bathe when the owner sprayed him. Possibly the bird had deformed wing bones as a result of being given a calcium deficient dart when hand reared. Unfortunately, this is extremely common in hand reared parrots. One vet I knew would routinely x-ray all the young parrots that were brought to him, and a shockingly large proportion had broken fractures or fractures that had healed due to lack of calcium when they were being hand reared. Mimicry, why do budgies, for example, excel? Because they are found in huge flocks, and when the flocks combine, individuals need to know the cause of their flock. They also must be able to make the correct sounds so that the flock members can identify them. So we find that birds that are naturally found in large flocks or originally were in large flocks, such as grey parrots, which unfortunately have been trapped to extinction or near extinction in many areas. That's why greys are such good mimics. And the same is true of other highly social species which come together to feed, such as rainbow lorikeets. A few parrots can communicate in human speech. One severe macaw would warn its owner it was about to bite by saying, "Ouch." It would continue to play with toys when asked to step up, and when ready to come out, it would put out its foot and say, "Up, up." Parrots keep in contact with complex vocalizations. We cannot speak their language, so they speak ours, especially oft repeated phrases such as "come on" and "what are you doing?" These replace the contact call. And they will also mimic sounds such as the telephone or the microwave, because we go running when we hear them, and they might believe if they copy the sound, we will hurry to them. A big problem is companion parrots in breeding condition attacking a partner or someone else in the house. This is an instinctive behavior. It will not subside. You can't teach them not to do that if they're in breeding condition. And the only thing is to avoid confrontations. You don't let the parrot out when your partner is out. Another problem is a parrot that is not caged or allowed to spend most of the day out of the cage. It eventually considers the room to be its own territory, and it will attack everyone who enters. So a parrot must have a cage. Aggression, as I've already mentioned, the cage is too small, so the parrot feels insecure, or aggression can be caused by someone teasing the bird. Biting, it could be your fault. Read its behavior and avoid confrontations. And don't disturb your bird when it's resting or feeding. Don't ask it to come out when it's doing either of those things. It has a set time for resting, and you should observe this. And don't put your hand inside the cage. For so many parrots, they are so territorial that even the tamest bird can bite at such a time. So, if possible, use swing feeders so that you can provide food and water from outside. Another behavior which is normal but considered undesirable by us is when the bird is looking for a nest. So in the home, even at ground level, if there are holes, your birds will try to enter a nest. They'll even fly onto the floor and search for a dark hole and aggressively defend that hole. So ensure that your parrot cannot get behind furniture or fireplaces where you cannot retrieve it. It will, of course, be destructive to furniture, so try to avert this by placing branches of fresh-cut willow or fruit trees in the places that it likes to perch. How do you prevent your parrot from attaining breeding condition? Do not stroke it on its back or anywhere else. This is something that you see so often, and it's wrong. Reduce the hours of artificial light. Feed a less stimulating diet. And some people provide cardboard boxes for their parrots to chew up, but unfortunately that can mimic a nest hole. Parrots in breeding condition commonly regurgitate food for the bird or for the person to whom they are bonded. This can be mistaken for vomiting in a single bird, but the bird is not ill. It's normal behavior. Drinking clean, fresh water is so important, especially if they are fed on pellets. They need to have water close by, and the water containers must be changed at least once a day. Occasionally you come across parrots that are afraid of hands, and the problem can be solved by training them to step onto a stick. Perches, they need to be versatile in shape and sizes. Parrots actually love vertical perches, and in the wild, they also often perch on extremely thin perches. They enjoy that, and that's something that most people don't give to their parrots. It's also important for aviary birds that they have perches of different thicknesses. Feather plucking, well, this is a subject for a whole presentation. So I saw a recent video online from someone who claimed to cure feather plucking by giving them apple cider vinegar. Alas, if only it was that simple. There are so many reasons for feather plucking, and unless we can get to the root of that reason, it will never stop. One reason is weaning too early, causing lifelong insecurity. Remember that most parrots are highly social birds and they do not like to be alone, but we keep them alone, and that is stressful. Can be caused by a very dry environment. So there's nothing worse than parrots you see with very brittle, dry feathers. Spray them with a plant mister if necessary, or keep them away from radiators, and make sure that they have large enough bathing facilities, not just the water in their cage. Some greys, especially, feather plucking is a seasonal problem that can start with the warmer weather and lengthening hours of daylight. Often it's only a temporary condition, hopefully just lasting a few weeks. Smoking, oh, parrots don't have expanding lungs like ours. They have air sacs which cannot filter out poisons, and they breathe 3 times more quickly than humans. So the chemicals in cigarettes are extremely harmful and can cause plucking. Nicotine on hands and fingers can be transferred to the plumage. So just remember, cigarette smoke is a dangerous cocktail of thousands of chemicals, including cancer-causing chemicals. Certain species are more susceptible to feather destructive behavior. Also, certain individuals with a more nervous temperament. And parrots can also start feather plucking when exposed to apparently insignificant changes, or even when going to a new home, or especially with greys, perhaps you're placing a new object near or within the cage without first placing it at a distance. Prevention is the best cause. You've got to try to keep your parrot stimulated, hide food in different items, make them work for their food. This is actually a peanut holder, but I used it for grapes, and they have to work hard to get the grapes out. So make them work for their food as much as possible. Finally, I don't need to remind you, but so many parrot species need our help. So many are threatened with extinction, and we have to contribute to the many wonderful organizations that are helping to save endangered species. After all, so many of our birds came from the wild, or their parents or grandparents were wild caught, and we owe it to them to help conservation projects. Thank you.
Wow, Rosemary, um, you touched on so many different areas and just a really great baseline of so many important issues. But I want to remind everybody that in your book, there's a whole lot more that there just wasn't time to get to today. This is such a comprehensive book. It's definitely my number one off the shelf resource. So kudos to you for so many books you've written, but especially this one. This is my favorite. And before I forget, I know we have quite a few behavior consultants with us today from IAABC. So your special phrase is no small cages. So just email us and we'll give you the code to get your continuing education units. So do you have time for just a couple of questions, Rosemary?
Yes, I have time for a couple of questions.
That's fantastic. We sponsor eco tours and spend time in the wild, never as much as you have covered in your lifetime for sure. But I was curious, have you seen birds who lost their mate that died and how they react to that? I mean, there's so many different takeaways by people that they just fly off and get a new mate, or do they act like crows and grieve, or what has been your experience about a mate that dies?
Well, we tend to think that parrots are the most sentient birds, but in fact, I've seen examples of birds like flycatchers and doves and sparrows, even house sparrows. I've seen the mate actually killed, perhaps on the road or when I was in the Pantanal once, a toko toucan flew down and grabbed in flight, which I believe is quite an unusual thing. It grabbed in flight a flycatcher out of a group of about 5 flycatchers, and it killed them. It killed this bird, took it down, plucked it and killed it. Took a while to completely eat it, probably about 20 minutes. And all that time, I assume it was its mate, was standing close by screaming and showing very disturbed behavior. Now, that's just a little flycatcher. So often we can't study these things in parrots, but there are plenty of examples, not that I've seen myself, of parrots in the wild that have been recorded by their very stressed behavior of grief after the mate has been killed.
And how about on the other side, finding a mate? I've spent a lot of time watching the hyacinths, trying to figure out the juveniles meeting each other and all that. How do you think they decide who to marry, so to speak?
Well, hyacinths stay with their parents until up to about 18 months, and then they join a group of other young birds, and they are with that group probably for 3 or 4 years. So
Hmm.
it's just like a group of human teenagers. During that time, they have the chance to find who they get on well with, and then so that by the time they're about 5 years old, they've already chosen their mate from this group of teenagers.
That's interesting. Do you
And
think that happens with other species too?
probably, but they're not well studied enough. But obviously, with the hyacinth, we've got Nieva graders, and she was studying them. She's been studying them for what, nearly 30 years now. And she knows with the hyacinths that they pair for life, but if one bird dies, they will eventually find another mate. Now, most species haven't been studied long enough for us to know that, but her marvelous work has proved that at least hyacinths are monogamous. Now, I'm not saying that that applies to all parrot species. It doesn't, but we know that some are.
It's really hard to find information on that. I swear I witnessed speed dating with the hyacinths when I watched them. It seemed like parents and a juvenile came in, they had a discussion, they flew off, another pair with a juvenile came in. It was, quite enthralling, but you just don't get much information about that. But we know that our parrots in captivity are so quick, especially Amazons, to decide they really like somebody or
Oh,
something.
how true that is. Um, Amazons seem to make up their minds very quickly.
Mm,
And that is why if you acquire an Amazon as a companion and it doesn't like you, you've had it. It's
right.
it's not going to change its minds.
Exactly. We try to explain that to people, you're just not the one. They just
Exactly.
they
Yeah.
see something we
It's,
don't see. Yeah.
yeah, it's true in captivity. Amazons can be extremely hard to pair up. If
Mm,
they lose their mate, they might never truly accept another bird. They'll accept it around, but in that respect, I'm sure they're like many people.
mhm.
We do have to think of them as individuals. I know anthropomorphism is frowned upon, but it's a good thing, in my opinion. You've got to realize that they are individuals.
Right. And what about some of the species that are really big flocks that we don't actually get to see as often, say like the umbrella cockatoo, which is so prolific in captivity, but we know so little in the wild. And
Yeah,
are they in groups? Do the males build nests in the ground? You see them
we
stuffing
don't
stuff under
know.
their
We
wings.
know almost nothing
Exactly.
about breeding biology of the Indonesian cockatoos because there's no there's a few very short-term studies, but there are no long-term studies. Of course, long-term studies of any species parrot species is very rare because there aren't many exceptional people like Nueva Guedes in this world who
Right.
will devote their whole life to one species. But
Right.
we are getting more information these days because um, you can radio tag parrots and in a lot of conservation projects now, nest boxes are used and the young are marked in some way, sometimes with discs, sometimes with rings or microchips. So we're learning more and more about the longevity, for example, of wild parrots. Before, I used to be slightly annoyed when I read such and such a species lives for so long in the wild. But we didn't know. We had no idea.
Yeah, yeah. In fact,
Now,
John
uh,
Brightsmith thinks that they die a whole lot younger than we thought they did because they fight over nests and mates, which is probably more common now that those things are endangered, nest sites, etc. But that's what he found in Peru. And for everybody listening, if you probably don't know, Neva Guedes, who Rosemary just mentioned, she's the one in Brazil who pretty much brought the hyacinths back from the brink of extinction, thanks to her lifelong work.
I
Yeah.
would encourage you to buy my book, Female Heroes of Bird Conservation, because I've written so much about her exceptional work and how you can see that rare individuals like her and
Mhm.
other women can turn round the fortunes of one species.
Exactly. I've met her several times. She's magical. Thank
She
goodness for her. Yeah. Um, Somebody wants to know what resource you recommend best for parrotlets. Did you
um
write a book on them too?
no, but there's a lot of very good research carried out as far back as 20 or 30 years. I think it was Stephen Beisinger in oh uh, I'm not sure, I can't recall now where it was, but because they were encouraged to breed in nest boxes, or actually in fence posts because they're so small, that was one species on which there were long-term studies made and some fascinating information about their breeding biology came to light. So I mean, you can find it on the internet. excellent material, really, really good work. I can send you an email with some reference so that
Okay.
people can look it up, because that was one of the few early studies. And of course, parrotlets have a much shorter lifespan than big birds like macaws. But the information gained from that study was so fascinating. And
Okay.
that was another one in which it was found that chicks can recognize the calls of their parents and so on.
Right.
You know,
Right. Exactly.
you see on television groups of penguins numbering thousands, and the parent has to go off to sea and catch fish, and it's away for weeks. And you think, when they come back, how can they possibly find their young one among these thousands? But we have to look at it like that. If we had a loved one in a big group of people and they were calling out to us, we would know, wouldn't we?
Right.
As we were near enough to hear them. And that's how it is with birds.
Right. That makes sense. And the way you explained about the parakeets being so good at mimicry because they live in these big flocks, which is makes perfect sense. Sounds so logical. Yeah. Somebody wants to know if we could give a diet, like a wild diet during a non-breeding season. Would that help keep the hormones down? I don't know. They're still going to have a hormonal time frame, especially if it's a calorie dense food, right?
Yes, well, it depends on the species. I can't really generalize. Obviously, some are fed too high protein diets anyway, um, or they're fed incorrect types of pellets or seed mixtures. It would depend on the species.
Did you feed pellets to your birds when you had your birds with you?
Never, never.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, as an experiment, I have offered pellets to my birds. Sorry, manufacturers of pellets, but the truth was that my birds did not recognize them as food. And
Hmm.
the reason was that they had too many other interesting types of food.
Hmm.
I know manufacturers of pellets say you have to withhold other foods. That is not how I care for my birds.
Yeah. It takes time to
If,
cut
if
a lot
you provide,
of food.
if you provide a varied enough diet, you do not need to feed pellets.
Right. Variety is the key in what
Yeah,
people
you've
are
got to
willing
know
to
what you're
do.
doing.
Yep.
Oh, okay, so there are some people who are lazy, but still, to me, it's not an excuse to feed them with pellets. It's an excuse not to keep parrots.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. It takes a lot of time, but it's part of the price of.
It is. If you can't take the time and the trouble to provide them with a very varied and healthy diet, then get a hamster.
I'm glad that you brought up figs again. Somebody's asking about figs, and they are one of the most nutritious foods, but they're good for all species, right?
Well, I mean, some species won't eat them, but a lot depends. I mean, my birds wouldn't eat fresh figs, but
So you had to get
but
rid
they
of
love
them.
the one the dried Lerida figs that are you buy them from the health food store, soak them for a few hours, put them on a hanger. Um, Excellent food, and the calcium content is really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, some people perhaps would feed them by chopping them up and putting them in the food dish. That is something else. I never feed fruits and vegetables chopped up. I just don't agree with it. Birds have got to forage for these things. They should be on hangers or attached to perches. But of course, most people can't do that because they've got too many birds. That is the hard truth.
Hey, we have like 35 birds here at the adoption center, and they all get a wide variety of fresh food every day. It's just
That's
part of the
excellent.
job. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. In fact, sometimes it's easier when you have more birds because you get to provide a wider variety, because you have to buy more food. So that's
yeah,
it. Yeah. Well,
yes. Because they have you give them foods that you might not have otherwise given because another pair has that food and you widen their diets. But
exactly.
what I should have said, which is very important, is that if young parrots do not receive a varied diet, it can be extremely difficult to wean them onto a variety of foods when they are older. That's why they must have lots of different foods in front of them to encourage them to sample them when they are young.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot said about them getting the nutrients they need from the parents feeding them as well. It's kind of like there's different
That,
bacterial probiotic things that they gain from being
yeah.
prepared. Yeah, yeah. What do you think about some of the big flock species like conures or cockatoos? Do you think that they also have a mate, or do they just decide during breeding season that, they're going to have hanky panky with that one this time or whatever?
Yeah,
How do
well,
they decide, you
I
think?
think um, we know there are some extra pair formations, but most of them, in species that bond very strongly, um, they are probably faithful to their mates, if not always, at least for several years. But well, it's like humans, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
What's the difference? Some are faithful for life, and others can't be faithful for a couple of years. So,
that's true. That's true. Yeah. Well, it's such an intriguing subject. Well, what do you think is the biggest takeaway you want people to have today about the nature of wild parrots, or the wild nature of parrots that takes itself into our homes that we must, realize and appreciate?
um, that uh,
There's so many, I know, but
they must be able to fly
Mhm.
every day. They must be able to fly.
Yeah, that's so hard with the big birds too, right? I mean, that's the challenge. The little ones are easy, the big ones are hard. Yeah. Well, I'm just glad to see Europe at least moving forward in a way that's very pro-flight and uh, keeping no wing clipping and other things. I think we're getting there in the States, but there's still a lot of people who are adamant about wing clipping and,
Well,
beak.
that is a shame. It really brings me sorrow to think that people do that.
Yeah.
Because,
Well,
well, enough said.
yeah. Flight and real food. Well, I know it's later there in Great Britain, and we are forever grateful that you've come back to join us again. You are, I don't know, Rosemary, there just aren't sufficient words to say how brilliant and experienced and important you are to the parrot world and the parrot community. And I, I mean, what you did today, I think, touched on so many basics of living with a parrot that it's almost like one of our core classes. I mean, you really touched on so many important things about living with a bird. So I hope the people here today will tell their friends to come back and watch the recording because
I
you
hope so. I really hope so. And thank you, Anne, very much for inviting me. And whoever's listening, I hope that somehow your birds will benefit from what I've said today.
exactly take one new thing home. That's always my motto. Just try. For me today, the takeaway was to go plant white willow trees because that sounds like
Yes.
something really beneficial, especially for our older birds that need
Birds, they
arthritis.
might have arthritis, and it could be doing them a lot of good.
Right. I
Get
had no
enough.
idea. That is excellent advice. So that's on my to-do list this week. So thanks, everybody. Again, I hope you'll consider joining us for the retreat in April. And if you can't join us then, I hope we will see you again in May. I think it was the 18th with Dr. Bianca Murphy to talk about beaks, the good, bad, and the ugly. So everybody have a great weekend. I hope to see some of you in April. And Rosemary, you're the best of the best. We're
Thank
eternally
you, Anne.
grateful. Yep. So the recording will be up in a couple hours, hopefully. And maybe you'll come back and join us yet again in the future. We'd love that. So
I'd like to, yes. Thank
okay.
you very much, Anne. Thank you.
Pleasure. Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you, Rosemary.
Bye.